All right, brief lecture here on Nicholas Carr's "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" Well, is it? Listen, honestly, I think the jury's a bit out on that, and I would say overall, the internet has been done far more good than bad. But I do think Carr makes some points in this essay as well. Um, I mean, he begins it right with the 2001, which, by the way, if you haven't seen that film, do so. It's great. But you know, in 2001, you have Hal the computer, right? And he's and he sort of bookends the essay in that, right? And saying, "Hal, something's happening to me. I feel it. I feel it. I feel it." Right? And the computer. And this is the computer that's sort of the AI that's sort of that's kind of almost a Siri or something of our phones, or the what Alexa, I guess the Google version of that. That's running the ship, and it makes a mistake or gets something wrong, and at the end of that film, and it's interesting that he begins the film with it's the computer that's saying this, that he's not the human figure in the film, and that film is sort of fascinating that way, in that at the end of it he's disconnecting the whole thing and basically killing the computer, and he's please Dave, don't. It's sort of and he's not speaking at all, the human being, and is acting very mechanical, and they sort of across that move film, the computer, sort of cross paths where the computer becomes more and more human, and the human becomes more and more machine-like. That was an interesting way to book it, a very intriguing way, I think, for Carr to have bookended this essay. And his main point here, right, is that the information and the tools, in general, intellectual tools we use don't just deliver us information; they also sort of shape our thought, and our minds tend to sort of they're very they're very malleable. Our minds, right, and we tend to sort of evolve and adapt to be more like the mental tools we most use. One example he gave, right, was mechanical timekeeping, which is again a completely human invention, right? It's not something that, in some ways, that even actually exists. There's no such thing really as 2 o'clock. It's just this way we've come to measure a day's passing. But we spend most of our lives not thinking about that at all, right? And just sort of living within the confines of this human construct, which is how we do. Culture is a little like that. A lot of things act like that, but. He also gave the example of Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, right, and how his thinking changed a bit when he started using a typewriter, he started writing more and more sort of a quick, sort of aphoristic writings rather than the long sort of philosophical treatise he'd been writing earlier in his career. And, Carr is ultimately asking, what is the internet maybe doing, to us? And I do think there are a few things to think about here. One is, again, that not just that it's providing us with information, but somehow shaping the way we think. And how would it be shaping it if it is? And his point is that it's become increasingly difficult. Right, for long form reading and for losing oneself in a book. And I must say, whenever I'm doing these classes live, back in the old days, and I asked this question, a lot of hands go up that. My young students who are so used to, who have, screens are mother's milk to your generation, in a way it wasn't quite to mine. In fact, I can remember buying my first Macintosh computer. I think I may have said this in our class last night, but my first computer I ever bought, I think it was 1993. I remember buying it. Had no intention of buying it, but they had the store off the Apple store at the time, which was on High Ridge Road, this tiny little store. It might not even have been an Apple store, but they sold Apple computers down there at Bull's Head, and there was a talented salesman on that floor, and they had a credit that I got approved for right right away, and I walked out of there with a computer, and it was a Mac called the Macintosh LC2, and that computer had 4 megs of RAM and a 40 megabyte hard drive on it. So that was the first one I bought. So I'm coming from bit of a different place. I can remember CompuServe and the internet just sort of coming. I remember Amazon first coming out. I remember when before Google, when there was Lycos, and it seemed like Yahoo was going to be the new one. So I've come at this a little bit differently than a lot of my students. But as far as how Google in general, we can speak, or just the internet in general, would shape how we think. Well, it makes sense that it would shorten it. And I must say, I know when I'm reading online, I tend not to read for as long. I get impatient quicker. I skim quicker. To the end of the to the end of the essay. I know when I've read some articles on things like giving advice on how to write for the internet, sort of articles, and often telling you to make sure they give. You'll notice that when you read an internet article, there's always every shorter paragraphs, and they keep breaking them up with these big little quotes in between, basically giving you a lot of breaks in your reading, so that it's just sort of little tiny increments, kind of leading you down through the path of the essay, and again they tend to be shorter in the first place, and there's something in Carr's view is being lost here, and that's deep reading is a particular kind of thinking, and there's more of a creative interaction between the reader and what they're reading, and I don't know if he's all the way right on that, but boy, I think he's somewhat right on that, and exactly what's being lost, I don't. That's hard to say, I think. But certainly that's the inability to sit in a chair for an hour at a time, for even more, God forbid, at a time, and read, and just lose yourself in page after page of unbroken prose. There's a strength of attention there, and there's an ability and a sort of an endurance of thinking along with a nuanced and complicated argument that could be getting lost a little bit in the listicles and all the bells and whistles that come along with. I mean, some of this got a little better that come along with reading on the internet. Some of this I think has gotten maybe a little bit better in that. A lot of the flashing ads and things, we all have ad blockers now, and so maybe it gets sort of cleaned up just maybe a bit, but I still think it's certainly having that general effect, I think, is fair, and that there'll be some sort of the consequences that I think is fair, and to, I think, resist that and find a way around that, I think, is also something we should probably be trying to do. It is worth keeping in mind, his argument about whether he's, being a bit of a, forget the word I'm looking for here. Sorry. A Luddite was the word he used. Sorry, and a Luddite being someone who sort of fears all anything new coming into their lives, and what, I don't think that's a completely unfair charge here. And a lot of people have written back against this too. Some smart people making smart points on it have written against Carr on this. He probably overstates at times, but again, I think sometimes a writer, even if they don't fully succeed in their argument, oftentimes can, just by bringing up certain questions and making certain points and getting us to look at something and think about it in a new way, is valuable in and of itself. And I think this piece usually does resonate with my students a fair amount. He also makes the point about how the internet is sort of absorbing all other mediums and sort of reshaping it in this image, and I think that's kind of probably true. Even I know if you watch, if anyone, my student, watch sports especially, right? But even the news at night, and you always have that crawl going along the bottom now, right? That's sort of ubiquitous. I just find that so distracting. Or if you're watching a film on like TNT or one of those, a basic cable channel, and you're not watching it, out of your Netflix or one of those kinds of, which is where I'm usually watching it these days, to be honest with you, or HBO or pay channel. You get the their logo, right? It's sort of a little bit see through, sort of in the corner. You get little commercials that will sort of flash right in the corner and play while you're doing. So there's all this sort of busyness, and that has even invaded TV, which itself was once blamed for ruining people's attention and keeping them from reading long books, right? And even, you can almost expand that out to the topography and of the world we're all living in, right? It seems like you can't pump gas without having a TV sort of jump on the gas pump, right, and show you some commercial or some little CNN snippet of a news story, usually involved, and some commercial gets thrown in there after that, or you get on an elevator, right? Same thing. You go into the bank. Oftentimes there's a TV playing. It just seems like there's screens sort of no matter where we're going, sort of in the world these days. And I do think it's worth mentioning, or worth keeping that in mind. And his point also would be that we're losing this sort of a sort of inner cathedral that being an educated person used to mean, and that would be, that you had another. And many of my students actually these days do not have a sense of history, either world or Western or American history, and I do think that can be a big loss. Because it just gives you a sort of an understanding of things, kind of places you in the world in a way where you feel like you're not. It makes you less reliant on your surroundings, and being an independent thinker is nothing to just dismiss. But again, he also points out, listen, Plato once, you know, bemoaned, the writing becoming a thing, because he thought men would lose their memories. And you know what? He was not wrong about that. Men did not. If any of you read Homer in school, once upon a time, a singer at a local Grecian Greek festivals, used to chant that whole thing over 3 days. And imagine memorizing that whole book. That's something. It's like 400 pages. So he was right about that. The men didn't, but also did not foresee all the good that would come of being able to that writing would bring. Same thing happened with the Gutenberg printing press, and it's always there, right? So I do think it'd be that far more good than bad is coming from the internet, to say the least. But it is. Thinking is not just a mechanical process, and there is something about deep reading that more is a kind of thinking in and of itself, and that it enhances sort of or an ability to make connections between things, an ability to hold not just one or two things, but a macro thing, and then several sub points, and hold all these sort of things in your head at once without too much trouble. It really will give one an advantage, I think, in our sort of mental muscles worth building. And I think Google's assumption, and there does seem to be an assumption in the way they go about things, that thinking is just a mechanical process and can be drawn out by just sort of mapped out with algorithms. I don't think that's correct, and I think it is going to be. And I think again, people engaging with social media, we can already see sort of as sort of warped, the way they will funnel in the same political information, that kind of thing. Some things we've talked about in classes before, really can affect us. I think it is something we have to guard against a bit. All right, thanks.